Hi, it's Dr. C. We're going to look at the Atheist Experience from the 8th of August 2021. Just before we jump into it, can I give a quick reminder about one, thanks to the ACA for allowing us to do this post. Two, we're here for the science. We'll jump in whenever we think there's something relevant to the kind of science that's going on. And three, we're here for potentially a discussion of critical thinking, but really the focus is on maybe where the scientific method might help. If any of you are interested in any of the callings that maybe we skip past because there's no reference to, effectively science, then that's absolutely fine. I'll put a link in the comments below so that you can go back and look at the full details of the particular call that wasn't of interest to us, which is absolutely fine. Finally, I really hope that you enjoy this video, and if so, think about this and let's move on. So here we go.
Atheist Experience, we are live. It is Sunday, August 8th, 2021. I'm Matt Tony. Join me this week from Recovering from Religion and countless other things, Dr. DrC. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Every time I hear your intro music and Shelley Siegel, I think she wrote a special song just for RFR, and it plays every time you call into RFR. Did you know that?
I did know that.
Okay.
We were talking about quite a bit of that when she was in town last, and playing around with musical instruments, sitting in the living room and in the kitchen. I think they wrote another song in the kitchen just while we were piddling around. So it's good stuff. Good. I love the people who are creative, who just can't stop,
creating,
writing songs or writing poetry or whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
I'm going to get to our first call here in just a second, but there's one item that, you're here obviously from Recovering from Religion, and that's because in part you've got an excursion come up. So why don't you tell people about that real quick, and we'll get back to it a little later.
Okay. Yeah. We've got, some people call it a retreat. We call it an excursion because we don't like the what do you call it? Religious over.
Starting off this week is caller Aaron in Texas, who wants to call me out for bullying behavior. So welcome, Aaron. How are you?
I'm well. Good afternoon, Matt. How are you doing?
Sure. I'm doing all right. What do you think is bullying?
Yeah. I'm a fan, actually, of the show. I've been a fan for a couple of years. And I've noticed, a couple of things that bothered me and I didn't like, but I've always put it off to the side, and I always, watch the show or listen to the show. And but lately it's been really getting to me. And
so what is it? What is it? What is it that you think? Jesus Christ!
You just dropped a.
Okay.
Hello?
I'm asking you, what is it that you call with it?
Okay. We start off with this going incredibly kind of weird straight away. Matt's getting annoyed, and I think the problem is that obviously there's and we all experience this in life. Sometimes when we try to do the best that we can, we don't always get it right. That's just life. We can't always, our brain cannot always be analyzing the system in front of us and getting it right. This happens to absolutely everybody. As a teacher or an educator, I kind of look at my class, and you try to pass over the information in the most useful way for the students, so that they will get a good grip of the kind of information that you're trying to get over to them. Why? Because you know that it will be important to them, and you don't always get it right. Sometimes you have amazing lessons. Sometimes it's a disaster. The difference between an amazing session and a disaster is not really in the head of the teacher, because we try our best all the time. It is difficult sometimes to get things right. Now, in the situation that we confronted with the Atheist Experience, you've got people calling in who will have a script because they know what they want to say, They've probably got a plan of, if they say this, then this is what I say. If they say this, then this is what I say. And the hosts have to try and respond to that. So it's not very easy for the hosts to be able to prepare themselves because they don't know what to prepare themselves for. Okay, so when someone comes in and they're critical, there is that phrase which we have in the UK. I don't think it's a common phrase, but we have it in the UK, and maybe we have it everywhere in the world, one way or another, which is that it's easy to create and it's incredibly easy to criticize. Or the sort of pulling it back a little bit, it's difficult to create, but it's very easy to criticize. One way, whichever phrase you wish to partake. And I think that in this situation, I'm not saying that Matt is irritated by this conversation. It hasn't gone very far. But he's basically asked the guy, what's your issue? In what way do you think that I'm bullying someone? And then there's a bunch of preamble. Get on with it. And although there's nothing wrong with explaining yourself, laying out the foundation of where you're coming from, because maybe Aaron doesn't want to annoy Matt. He just wants to kind of explain it in the kind of nicest possible way. But the stress levels rise as soon as you start criticizing somebody. And we all need to appreciate this particular issue with people. It is very difficult to criticize someone and not have that person get upset about it. This is a life skill. It is, if you like, it's a life skill to be able to comment to someone about something that you're not happy with and not have them instantly dig their heels in, shove the defense mechanisms in place and protect themselves. I have the most adorable wife. I love her. She loves me. We are like the business. But if I need to criticize her in any possible way, I have to be incredibly careful about doing it. And I've had kind of over 50 years of experience of kind of life on this planet, and I still get that wrong. I cannot get it right. So you've got to be really careful. So just get on with it. If the introduction is just tell me what you think, then just tell what you think. Don't go through the preamble. It raises the levels of pressure. It raises the levels of kind of stress, and it creates not great situations. So anyway, let's go on and see how this pans out, because I'm not convinced it's going to pan out well.
That you are. What is it that you think? Jesus Christ!
You just dropped a. Hello?
I'm asking you, what is it that you call that you are seeing that you think is bullying?
Well, just last week you dropped a video on the channel about with a guy named Iraq, and Iraq wasn't an intellectual giant. I'm not saying that, but there are.
Aaron?
In that video, there are so many times where you ask a question and he's trying to answer it. You just cut people off. Look, everybody's human. Now you get flustered or frustrated.
Aaron, I'm going to ask you for the third or fourth time now. What is it that you...
I think Matt is basically now saying, okay, with Iraq last week, and I remember that particular conversation, give me the specifics. What did he ask me? What did he say? How did I behave in a bullying way? I think that's what the issue is here. We're going for the specifics.
You consider bullying.
Yeah. See, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, then if that's what you consider bullying, you can fuck right on off, because I'm hosting a show here, and I'm asking. Oh, you have a problem with me cursing?
I have a problem with you bullying people.
That's what. So I get that, Aaron. Aaron. That's why I keep asking. What is it that you think is bullying? No, Aaron. I'm asking you the same question for the fourth time. What is it that you think is here? I'll tell you what, Aaron. I'm going to put you on your ass on hold. You're now on mute. I'm going to ask you again. What is it that you think is bullying? I'm trying to address your concern, but so far all I've got is that I interrupted someone who wasn't answering the question, just like you're not, and that I cursed. Okay, so what is it? Now I'm taking you off of hold. What is it that you think is bullying?
Matt, what did I just explain to you? Were you listening when I gave you my
that's
answer?
so not good.
Guess who's not listening to you ever again? Ban this guy.
Okay, we're going to move on.
We have a caller who specifically called today because you're on the show. Clifford in Virginia, thanks so much for waiting. You're on with Dr. Daryl Ray.
Hey, Clifford.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Daryl. How are you guys doing today?
Very good.
I guess. Well, so yeah, I'm calling in reference to my grandmother. Essentially, she's had in the past a big influence on my life when it comes to religion. I grew up as a Pentecost Christian. Essentially, I had these 3 occurrences in my life where I, tried to put my all into religion, and it resulted in me being admitted to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, the second time I was actually in the military. I was stationed in Fort Meade up near NSA. This was around the time with.
I'm not sure whether I'm comfortable with the idea that someone tells me that they have an interaction with religion and it ended up putting them in hospital. There's got to be something wrong there. Okay, that's stepping outside of the scope of what I really want these sessions to be, but that's not good. That's not good.
Stationed in Fort Meade up near NSA. This was around the time with Edward Snowden. So I kind of thought the government was looking on me, and I pretty much thought I was the Antichrist on all 3 occasions.
Mm-hmm.
I then joined college, and during my time in college, I sort of gained more information and started really questioning my beliefs. And since then, my life has kind of had an upturn, and I was actually able to, graduate and succeed. So the issue, though, is I'm kind of dealing with my grandmother where, she sort of brings up, Armageddon and God's going to crack the sky and hell, and these really irrational beliefs. And, my son actually, he has care with her. So I'm trying to figure out how to kind of handle that situation, really what to say, because although I feel like I'm over it.
Okay, I'm going to move on, but I would like to say that when religion tries to impose itself upon people, but through fear, through a discussion about the fact that there will be hell and damnation and eternal punishment and these kind of things, this is just crazy. First of all, it's just absolutely ridiculous. It flies in the face of anything associated with the concept of a benevolent God. The idea that the use of the term father is often used by religious people for God. I think that as a father myself, I have 2 children. The idea that I would ever do anything that would in any way commit them to eternal damnation, that I would punish them forever, just not going to happen. They are my treasures. They are one of the most important things in my life. I say that because, of course, there's my wife as well. The idea that I would consign them to eternal punishment because, I don't know, they don't believe something that I say to them, it's just absolute ridiculous. And I think that when people go through mental trauma associated with the fact that their religion or their church or their pastor or whatever it is has basically told them that if you don't believe me, it's eternal hellfire. I mean, that is, just think about that. That is absolutely ridiculous. And it flies in the face of everything that you know about people who love people. It's just not going to happen. There are so many people that I have met in my life that I'm not overly happy with, but I would bear no ill will to them. I certainly wouldn't want them just because, I think maybe they've not been brilliant in their life, as I haven't. I'm not saying anybody is perfect, but when you look at people and you think, okay, well, you know, they've been not great there. So let's burn them forever. I mean, that's just crazy. So this idea is crazy, and I think that the idea that you would create a situation where someone was fearful of their eternal existence is frankly out of order, just not acceptable. Moving on, because this is crazy. Let's move on to the next caller, because this one is just simply unimpressive in a serious way.
Look at them as they put themselves up there for your viewing pleasure, which evidently isn't going to happen. Oh, there it is. Look, and there's 2 cats today, so there's like a parade of cats.
That is the wonderful
2 cats
crew.
and crew cats, and yeah. So on the phone today, and it's a good day to have him. Anthony in Illinois wants to know a little bit about what evidence we have for why God doesn't exist, but also claims he's got scientific and personal evidence that God does exist. So
here we go.
Welcome, Anthony. Which God is it that we're talking about?
I'm a Christian, so you know that should give you the answer.
No.
Okay. How did you disprove all the other gods?
Okay, let's just pause that for a second. That is a complete and utter fiddle. I'm a Christian, so that should tell you that's rubbish. Because there are so many different versions of Christianity, it's unreal. And actually, the Christian God is the same as the Jewish God, and it is the same as the Islamic God, and they are completely different in the way that they view their religion. Now, let's just not get into all the different versions of Christianity. So I think that is quite worrying for this particular call, but let's see how it goes.
How did I disprove all of the other gods?
Ooh, let's go just back a second.
I'm a Christian, so you know that should give you the answer.
Okay. How did you disprove all the other gods?
How did I disprove all of the other gods?
Yeah, I mean, you're calling in to ask me how I disproved your God, so I'm assuming you've done the work and disproved all those other gods, right?
Yeah, it's not my position to try to disprove all of the other gods or all of the other religions.
Well, of course,
and it's not. And it's
you a couple of questions.
No, that's fine. So that was my point, Anthony, is that it's not up to us to disprove your God or anybody else's God. It's up to you to prove them. My position is not I've proved that your God doesn't exist. My position is I am not convinced that your God does exist.
Exactly. That's the reason why I wanted to get into my questions, because I knew this is where you were going to take it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Can I just, before we get into this, because I don't know where this is going to go, I would point out that Matt's comment there is that he's not convinced that the God exists. That is not a positive statement. The statement, I am not convinced that a God exists, is not the same as a God does not exist. If you state that a God does not exist, there is a burden of proof on you to explain that, to give the rationale by which that has led you, if you like, to making that statement. If you say, I am not convinced, there is no burden of proof there. You can't you can't prove the idea that I'm not convinced about something. The argument there is I'm just not convinced of it. You have not convinced me. Okay. I suspect that might be important in the conversation that we're about to have, but let's see.
So exactly. That's the reason why I wanted to get into my questions, because I knew this is where you were going to take it. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to start the debate off with asking you a yes or no question. Do you believe in God?
No.
Boring.
You don't believe in God. Okay. So what evidence do you have that prove that God is not real, other than strictly saying that you have no supernatural evidence or experiences?
Anthony, it's like you weren't listening to the beginning of the call at all. It's not up to me
No, I
to
definitely was listening to the
No,
beginning
you
of the
weren't
song.
listening. You weren't listening.
You're
Listen to
afraid
me.
of
You
contradicting
listen,
yourself.
Anthony.
You're
Listen,
afraid of contradicting
Anthony.
What are
yourself,
you
so you
doing?
won't answer the
Anthony,
question.
Man, calm
would you
down.
listen to me? You
Go
just
ahead.
asked me what proof or evidence I have that proves that God doesn't exist. When I addressed this at the beginning of your call, I don't need to disprove a God. It's not my job to disprove a God. I don't have to, nor should you. You answered this yourself. How the hell can you go to that question after what I introduced? It's up to you to prove that your God exists, and until it does, I'm not going to be convinced.
So are you afraid of answering the question? Is that it?
Okay, that is just a stupid answer. That is a stupid answer to Matt's comment. Are you afraid? For goodness sake. Matt has just given a response that basically states, it is not my position to try and justify the fact that I don't believe in your God, that I am not convinced that your God exists. It is your responsibility to try and give me the proof. Are you afraid to do that? That is just crazy. That suggests that this conversation is not going to go well, but we'll see.
I'm to prove that your God exists, and until it does, I'm not going to be convinced.
So are you afraid of answering the question? Is that it?
I'm afraid. Yes, Anthony, you big strapping intellectual there. You've sorted it out. The guy who hosts. No. I'm going to put you on mute for a second. You've sorted it out, Anthony. The guy who hosts a weekly call-in show, who debates all callers who call in, who also makes his living doing debates against professional apologists, is afraid to answer your question. Also, we're talking about the guy who answered your question with the very first comment that I made about your call. So, okay, would you like to try again? Be able to address to? Alvin in North Carolina wants to talk to us about Pew Research. So, how you doing, Alvin?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Pew Research, takes studies of various people, and Pew Research and a number of other organizations have determined that Christians live 7.
Okay, I'm just going to pause there for a second and show you a web page in case you're not aware of Pew Research. Here we go. Pew Research. About Pew Research Center. Pew Research Center is a non-partisan fact tank that informs the public about issues, attitudes, and trends shaping the world. Let's just highlight the bit that I'm reading so you can see where we are here. We conduct public opinion polling, which is obviously dodgy, demographic research, content analysis, and other data-driven social science research. We do not take policy positions. Okay. Our mission. We generate a foundation of facts. Okay, I always worry when people refer to facts, because I think that what most people refer to as a fact and what science refers to as a fact are generally different. But anyway, we generate a foundation of facts that enriches the public dialogue. Yeah, okay. And supports sound decision making. Yeah. We are non-profit, non-partisan, and non-advocacy. We value independence, objectivity, accuracy, rigor, humility, blah, 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 blah. Okay, right, okay. So this is Pew Research. The one thing that they do, which I do worry about, is that Pew Research, along with an awful lot of other organizations, they're not the only ones that basically try to address whatever issue they wish to address through a discussion and a consensus from the public, etc., etc. I always worry about the fact that most of the issues that are dealt with that are anything to do with people are multi-functional issues or multi-parameter issues. In other words, the arguments or the parameters that determine a particular position for people are always multifunctional. They're always more than one thing that determines the way that a person behaves. It is very rare that any particular issue for a human being is based on a single issue of this or this. There are normally a whole plethora of ideas or information that contributes to them taking that particular position. So if anybody tries to dissect that and make a concrete statement about, well, this happens because of this, then I always worry about that. In science, we have this idea that relates to this. It's called fair testing. Fair testing is where you look at an outcome, and what you try to do is limit the number of possible parameters that could affect that outcome. So if I focus down on, let's say, an experiment, in order for an experiment to be a fair tested experiment, you vary one parameter, one variable. You control the value of it. You think about everything else that could possibly change, and you fix the values. You do not allow any other possible parameter to change, and then you look at the outcome. So you control an input variable, or a so-called independent variable, and you look at the outcome, whatever the outcome is, whatever the value is that you're measuring as your outcome, and you make sure everything else is fixed. If you don't do that, you can look at your outcome, and the problem is that you don't know which parameter contributed to that change. That's the problem. So fair testing is crucial to the scientific endeavor, to the scientific method. So hopefully we won't end up going there, and that actually this will not hit upon that particular issue. But let's see.
Years, take studies of various people, and Pew Research and a number of other organizations have determined that Christians live 7 years longer than atheists.
Okay, I choose my words carefully. That is rubbish. It may well be that the studies that have been done reference the fact that a particular area of society live longer than a particular different area of society. But can you conceive of the reasons why that might be? Can you conceive of the number of different parameters that would contribute to a particular group of people having a particular combination of circumstances that would lead them to a particular outcome? Can you conceive of the number of different things that might contribute to this particular group of people having a longer life than this particular people? It's just mind-bogglingly crazy. And to identify one means that basically you're looking for the reason that justifies whatever the hell you want to say, which is rubbish.
People, and Pew Research and a number of other organizations have determined that Christians live 7 years longer than atheists. And I just wanted your opinion.
My opinion on what? Daryl, do you have an opinion?
Well, first of all, you need to cite your sources here a little bit. There's a hell of a lot of research out there, and there's a lot of contradictory research.
That's true.
So the first thing I'd ask is, what's the source? So make sure you give us whatever the primary source is. I don't mean a newspaper report. I mean the Pew research.
Yeah. So the Pew research is what he was referencing. But go ahead. Right.
Well, no, he might have been referencing an article he read in the newspaper that cited Pew, and that's what we get a lot. I want to know the actual Pew research. But the second thing is, there's much more sophistication in this research than you might think, and Pew's been in the middle of it, and they've done some good work on it. If you think of belief and non-belief as a spectrum, with believers way over here, on my right, and they've got a deep God belief, and they've got a church, and they attend that church every Sunday. And then you come up clear over here on the other side, and you've got non-believers who have groups they attend. We have one right here in Kansas City called Oasis, and you look at their respective quality of life and longevity of life. They're about equal.
Yeah.
I think the variable is community.
Yeah.
Whether it's a believer community or non-believer community, communities make people healthier. Communities make people mentally healthier. Communities give you support economically, financially, emotionally.
I would also say that in the US, the attitude towards community is different to the UK, is different to France, Germany, Italy, Spain. And I think that the influence there of community is significant, but very, very different. So the kind of studies that have been done in whatever, and I don't know what the studies have been reported, but whatever the studies are, they would potentially give completely different outcomes from the different countries based on the strength of community, just as one parameter. Income is another parameter that has an effect. The predominance of good or not good advice on things like nutrition, social services, support within the community, which it links back to community, of course. These parameters are all influential on this particular issue. So this is a non-starter, really. So I intend to, having made my comment about fair testing, move on from this.
So
I think
and
Alvin
that's what
incorrect, because Alvin is saying that Pew Research says Christians live 7 years longer. But I think the research, if I recall correctly, was that religious people live 7 years longer on average. And Alvin's just taking that to mean Christian when it applies to
I'm
people
not sure they do with religious people in the Muslim countries in particular.
That's reasonable. We know whether it's religious or not. There's community that's the difference.
Is not the same.
Pew didn't do a very good job back in the early 2000s of
on that
separating
note, real quick,
out.
we have Lexi in Oklahoma. And yeah, so we're talking about leaving Jehovah's Witnesses. Welcome, Lexi.
Hi. Yes, so I'm a recently deconverted former Jehovah's Witness. My husband's an atheist and a big fan of the show. He says he was really excited that I'm getting to talk to you two in particular.
Oh, great.
But, so basically he feels like I'm an atheist, but I don't know if that label really applies because I think I go back and forth too much in my head. Like Jehovah's Witnesses constantly talked about the end of the world, and I feel like it doesn't make sense that they've been wrong so many times, and that feels like enough for me to think that they're going to keep being wrong. But at the same time, it's still, sometimes I feel like the end of the world is still right around the corner, like they always say, and I'm just like kind of having trouble figuring out how to like navigate away from the feelings and focus on what's true.
Good for you. Well, first of all, congratulations, because it is difficult. I said earlier to an earlier caller, it's difficult to get out of Pentecostalism. And I'm telling you, it's even more difficult to get out of Jehovah's Witnesses. So you've done a massive step and you've done a great favor for yourself, I'm sure. Also, we have a very big community of ex-JWs at Recovery from Religion. Chat in with us and ask to join our group. And we've got all sorts of resources for ex-JWs because you guys are really, they really go at you when you're children. And that's, how long were you in the JWs, Lexi?
I stopped going to meetings in 2019. So like, I feel like my last meet, or maybe 2020, my last meeting was like right before the pandemic started.
Oh, okay. And you're
okay. I'm going to pause there because much as I have massive sympathy for the situation that Lexi's been through, it's not really relevant to the point of these particular sessions. Lexi sounds absolutely lovely, absolutely wonderful. She sounds incredibly young. And I'm probably not allowed to say that. That's probably going to get me in trouble, the fact that she sounds young and she's married. But, you know, that's, people are allowed to marry young or are allowed to have a young voice. But she sounds incredibly sweet, which is probably something else I'm not allowed to say. And we'll move on to the next caller.
were raised in
is it Marquise in North Carolina? Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, you are pronouncing it correctly. Oddly enough, nobody ever gets it, so I just usually accept Marcus.
I knew somebody else named Marquise, but I wasn't sure that that between me and the call screen and everything else that we spelled it correct. So anyway, welcome. You had a question for us. How can we help?
Yes, sir. So one of the things I want to do is, man, like watching your show is better than any comedy show I've ever seen in my life. Like, you are hilarious, brother.
Well, thanks.
I really enjoy the conversations. And Dr. Ray, I appreciated your comment. I'm one of those folks that are kind of, on the fence, I guess you would say. And I think that there is, your life is more tumultuous, being kind of in the middle versus halfway in, halfway out. Basically, I was indoctrinated into, Christianity, basically under the Baptist faith
really
as a kid. And as I started to get older, I started to question everything based on I guess you can call it the sub-subject of racism, because once I started to study geography and, different things you start to learn in school, symbolism, etc., I started to ask questions, like, hey, we know where these people were from. We have pictures of what they look like. Why are y'all basically feeding us this? This is wrong. And you start to realize there's a larger thing at play, and you realize how religion was perverted, in order to promote, slavery, of course, but also, other things that are horrible.
I don't know where this is going.
So I kind of separated myself from, the whole Christian piece of it, or, basically just saying like, hey, I believe that there's a power higher than myself. We can call that power.
Marquise, can I interrupt you here briefly? What was the consequence of you deciding to leave? What was the consequence?
Well,
good or bad? Good or bad?
Well, good, bad, and indifferent, because some of the folks that around me, friends and family members, respected my position, because obviously I had evidence to support my claim. And some people were rejectful for it because we're and especially in Black households, you were taught like, you read the Bible, you do not question God. That's
right.
We are told that.
Yeah, right. Are you familiar with Jeremiah Kamara's work? I think you'd like it from what you just told me. He's got two extremely good.
I'm actually not.
Okay, I'm going to move on from this.
He's a big part of the Black non-believers community.
As we keep going here, George in Arizona wants to talk about whether or not the resurrection could have happened. Welcome, George.
Goodness me. Okay.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Pretty good.
Hello?
Yeah, yes. We can hear you. You wanted to talk about whether or not the resurrection is possible?
Okay, just before we get into this, because again, I have no idea where this is going to go. The one thing I can say about the resurrection is that the resurrection, in my view, is a supernatural event. This seems to be an issue that's come up a couple of times. It came up in the last session and the session before about the concept of supernatural. The idea that someone would be dead, and I don't just mean like, whoa, okay, their heart has stopped, it looks like they're dead, let's give them an electric jolt, oh, they're back to pumping oxygen again and everything seems to be okay. I mean, someone is clinically dead and they have been dead for days, and then the decay process, the fact that when your heart stops and no more oxygen is around your body, and your brain shuts down and decay processes set in, and we know for a fact that if your brain doesn't get enough oxygen, then it starts to suffer in serious ways. And of course, if it gets zero oxygen for a long enough period of time, then it's an irreversible process. I'm talking about the fact that 3 days later or 2 days later, Friday to Sunday, that kind of thing, you would suddenly come back to life and everything is fine. Your brain still functions fine. Your muscles have not atrophied, etc., etc. That is supernatural. That is not a process that we can investigate. If it was a process we can investigate, if we could have people who have kind of gone through that process and we could reproducibly do that, which would feel like an unethical experiment, but if we could do that to them, and then every time they sort of come around, they're back to normal, it's like there was no problem, that would be scientifically something we could investigate. That would be a natural phenomena we do not have an explanation for yet. However, this is not that situation. Every person that we have ever known that is subject to scientific scrutiny, that basically means anybody sort of, in recent times where we have scientific equipment, if they have died and they have been dead for 1, 2, 3 days, they do not come back to life. So the resurrection itself, this concept that someone died on a Friday and on a Sunday, they're up again. We'll ignore the concept of other people coming out of their graves and a zombie march occurring. Let's just ignore that bit. The idea that that would happen is against what we understand as the processes that occur that are determined by the rules of our universe, the laws of physics. So that is what I would call supernatural. This is a supernatural event, and therefore we have zero evidence. There is no miracle that has happened that we have been able to investigate using the scientific method, set it up again, get the same effect. Set it up again, get the same effect. If we could do that, it would not be supernatural. It would be a natural event that we do not yet potentially have the explanation for. That is not the supernatural. The supernatural is an event that cannot be explained using the scientific method because it breaks the rules. Okay, so let's move on.
We can hear you.
Good.
Pretty good.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
We can hear you. You want to talk about whether or not the resurrection is possible?
Yeah. So first, I just want to kind of introduce myself. I'm 15 years old. I don't know if that's relevant, but that's all I just kind of wanted to bring out for some reason. And I find it pretty cool to let's see. So I was gonna ask, do you agree that Jesus existed?
I don't have any problem with the notion that he did, but that doesn't mean that I'm convinced it's a done deal that he existed. It's really hard to figure out. We talked about this kind of recently. It depends on what you mean by Jesus. Like if you list all the things that are attributed to Jesus's life, there's pretty much none of them that we can verify. And so when some of those things include miraculous events that seem heroic and beyond what one could expect to find in reality, then it could be that we're just talking about kind of like a fictional creation. But let's just say that if you take away the miracle things and you just want to say that there was an itinerant rabbi, Yeshua ben Joseph, who possibly existed in first century Judea, I'm okay with that as a starting point.
Yeah, I should point out here that as far as I am personally concerned, the concept that there would have been someone called Jesus or Jeshua at that time, not an issue. There would have been lots and lots of those. The idea that there would have been someone who professed to be a Messiah, that was not a particular issue either. There was a feeling at the time under the oppression of the Romans that they wanted a Messiah was to come, and that they needed a Messiah. So the idea that someone, and it is known that people would have called themselves a Messiah that clearly weren't, and so that's not an issue either. The idea that someone was crucified is not a problem. The idea that someone was crucified and their name was, as we would say today, Jesus, that's not a problem either. None of that purports or supports the idea that this person that might have existed was the Son of God. That's massively different. So I don't think that those things are particularly impressive. I would say that a lot of the quite outrageous acts that occurred associated with Jesus's life, for example, just if I choose one, the so-called slaughter of the innocents, the idea that Herod was in charge of Judea at the time, and he was told by a bunch of people that there was going to be someone who was going to be born who would be a king of kings, blah, 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 that sort of thing. That was a big issue. And in the Bible, it states that Herod basically had the firstborn or the first babies of all of effectively the Jewish people in the region killed. Okay, there is no evidence that happened. Apart from the Bible, a book does not count as evidence in its own right. It is trying to prove itself. The idea that there was this thing called the slaughter of the innocents is just not verifiable. Herod, like most other people that kind of looked after different regions of what was at that time the Roman Empire, will have had someone who was basically reporting back to Rome about what was going on. It is known that Herod, for example, I think killed his firstborn child because of something to do with the fact that he thought that he would usurp him, so he had him killed. That was reported back. The idea that Herod would basically state that go out and kill all the firstborn children of all the Jews, the idea that wouldn't be reported back, craziness. Of course it would be reported back. Now, I am aware of the fact that at that time in history, Judea was a strange place. It was a crucial province between the east and the western side of what was that part of the Roman Empire. And so it had crucial importance. And also there was a civil unrest going on. So information transfer was not ideal. However, we have lots of reports of things going on at that time. We have lots of reports from Roman chroniclers about, what Herod was doing, for example. And we have nothing about the idea that he killed all the firstborn. So, like an awful lot of the Bible, the actual details of what actually may have happened, there's just zero evidence. Now, if you want more information on this, I'm going to show you again a web page, and the web page is from Amazon, and it's for David Fitzgerald. Here we go. Now, David Fitzgerald, among other things now, is an author, and he has written a bunch of books, and the two that I would like to, if I just move up so you can actually see him, the two that I would like to draw your attention to are Nailed, which I have read, and it is a compelling read. I cannot believe it's £3.99. That is a ridiculously low price. Anyway, and if you haven't got a Kindle, get yourself a Kindle because they're really useful. You need to read. Everybody needs to be reading. And Mything in Action is another one. $6.66 for the Kindle edition. That is a crazy low price. And so go out there and get yourself a copy of it. Nailed is amazing because it discusses effectively the myth concept of Jesus as being a myth, that the evidence for the fact that Jesus, as in the Bible, Jesus actually existed is just virtually zero. There's just no evidence. It's a compelling read. If you haven't read it, go out and get it and read it, and then you can form your own judgment. And if you want effectively part 2, then go for Mything in Action. If you want to listen to David Fitzgerald, then type David Fitzgerald into YouTube and you'll get him talking. He's done debates with people, and also there's a couple of really good, I think he's on Talk Heathen, and he's definitely on the Atheist Experience, and he tends to be quite sort of aggressive in his kind of conversational style, but I think that's just because he's got an awful lot to say. He's really good, and those books are well worth reading. Anyway, let's get on with this.
That there was an itinerant rabbi, Yeshua ben Joseph, who possibly existed in first century Judea. I'm okay with that as a starting point.
There were probably 30 of them, by the way.
Yeah.
What about his crucifixion? Do you agree he was crucified?
No, I don't have.
No.
This is a claim, but I'll go ahead and grant, for the sake of this discussion, that there was someone who was killed by crucifixion that you're referencing.
So is Christ's crucifixion is historical?
Okay, no, it's not.
No, it's not.
Even
Absolutely not.
No, so George, I'm sorry, but it's simply not a verifiable fact that Jesus either existed or was crucified. That's not a verifiable fact. It is something that is accepted, generally speaking, by historians, Christian and otherwise, but it's not something that we can demonstrate is actually true.
Okay, so Gerd Ludemann and Dr. Bart Ehrman all agree. Atheist scholars say that Jesus did in fact crucify. What happened to him?
George.
Wait, hold on. I didn't even get to say.
Okay, basically, Bart Ehrman is the big one that he's referring to there. Check out Bart Ehrman's posts. Bart Ehrman does not say that at all. George is referring to stuff that is incorrect.
No.
Say that.
I think Matt has
Okay,
actually
so Gerd
been in
Ludemann
debates with him,
and Dr. Bart Ehrman all agree. Atheist
or...
scholars say that Jesus did in fact crucify. What happened to him?
George.
Wait, hold on. I didn't even get to say
No,
that.
I know you didn't get to finish because you're not listening. As some of the two of us, which one of us knows Bart Ehrman?
Can you just please let me finish?
No. Of the two of us, which one of us knows Bart Ehrman?
I don't know Bart Ehrman. Do you?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
I've moderated a debate with Bart.
George, you walked into that
Here's
one.
the thing. Instead of citing what somebody says, because Bart Ehrman and I have talked about this, and I've been there when he's done a debate on the historicity thing. He thinks Jesus was historical. The fact that there are people who can disagree on this, there's no evidence that Bart or anyone else can point to say, here you go, here's exactly how we know that Jesus existed and was crucified. But if you'd have listened to me, George, and I'm giving you every possible benefit of the doubt, I said that I'm fine with the notion that Jesus existed. I said I'm fine for the sake of this discussion with going that he was crucified. All I'm saying is that you have no way to demonstrate that that actually happened. But I did note that historians, both Christian and non-Christian, generally accept that this is what likely happened. Is that why?
Okay, but I would point out that the number of historians or biblical scholars, as time moves forward, that actually cast doubt on the evidence that Jesus existed is rising.
Why is that a problem for you?
Like, do you? Okay, I agree with that. But do you agree with that he was crucified?
No.
What?
I agree that
George
most.
Just said.
George, stop.
Okay, let me see real quick.
George,
Shut up,
George, stop.
You didn't even
George, stop.
Why do people get like this? If you make a comment and then the person says to you, oh, I don't accept that, I accept this. And then you just move forward as if they'd accepted everything that you've said. This is not good. It suggests that you're reading from a script.
George, stop. George, stop. Because you don't get to just move on. I want to make sure we're on the same page. Otherwise, it becomes a waste of time. I am fine with the notion that most historians accept that Jesus existed and was crucified. Then you asked me if I personally think that Jesus was crucified, and I am not convinced that he was crucified or that he existed, but I'm fine with the notion. I want to make sure we understand that.
We do now. Okay.
Okay. What's the question?
We don't, but go on.
What would convince you that he was crucified?
Evidence.
Okay, so most of the sources that say Jesus did live are the same sources that say he was crucified. So what sources do you get that Jesus was alive since you believe that? What are your sources for him being alive?
Boy, you're just not listening, George. I told you, I neither believe that Jesus was alive nor that he was crucified because there isn't sufficient evidence for it, but I am fine with the notion that historians accept those things, and I'm fine with accepting them for the sake of argument. Don't tell me that you've listened to me if you then turn around and demonstrate that you did not listen to me.
Why are you mad?
What is your question?
My question is, my question was,
I think that George then said, "Why are you mad?" But George doesn't realize that he's actually being dishonest here, which is a little bit weird.
my question was, so you don't have a problem with them believing that Jesus existed. Is that what you're saying?
That's not what he said.
Wow, I don't know why you keep paraphrasing this. I personally am not convinced, but I am aware that most historians are convinced.
Okay. So you're on that. So
No.
You want
Yes.
evidence. What evidence is convincing to you?
Of what? What's the claim?
Of Jesus being crucified. What evidence would convince you?
Show me some actual record that shows that the specific person you're talking about was recorded historically as having been executed by crucifixion.
Okay, the Gospel of Matthew.
No,
Oh,
so those aren't historical documents. They're not eyewitness accounts, and we have no idea who wrote them. You can't use anonymous sources that were written decades after the facts. That's not how we do things.
Prove that they were anonymous. Prove that they were anonymous.
Oh God.
Okay.
George, you are aware that we legitimately don't know who wrote those books. And we also
George.
know that they were written 30 to 40 years
no.
afterwards.
Stop. George, do you know what this is I'm holding in my hand?
You're holding you're gonna quote the Bible. I'm pretty sure you're gonna quote the Bible where it says the same thing. But there's atheist scholars who also say that the Gospels do bear record of Matthew. For example,
George, if you would shut the fuck up, you little runt, and listen to me and stop presuming what I'm gonna say. What I asked you was, what am I holding in my hand? A Bible, right?
Yes, that's what I just said.
Do you know what it says in this Bible right here at the beginning of the book of Matthew?
That Matthew was anonymous.
Correct. Now, if Bibles and Christian scholars show it's not the Bible that says Matthew is anonymous, because that section at the beginning of the book of Matthew is not part of the Bible. That's commentary from Christian scholars. If you go out to any Christian scholar source, earlychristianwritings.com, hell, Wikipedia, the authorship of Matthew is unknown.
Okay, so is that why you believe that it's anonymous?
What?
That's what anonymous means, George.
Exactly. Is that why you believe it was written anonymously? Because all the scholars agree.
Yes. No, hang on, George. When you say it wasn't, I'm not saying it was, George, stop, George. First of all, I'll retract the runt thing. That was mean. But you need to listen and stop pretending that you're listening, because you keep coming back to paraphrasing. It wasn't written anonymously. The point is, it is anonymous now. We do not know who the author of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John are.
Okay. That's your claim?
That's a fact.
What is it with
Even your own scholars believe that or know that.
Brandon in Arizona thinks this is all a waste of time. Welcome, Brandon.
Yeah, hey, Matt, how are you?
Evidently, I'm mean and mad, but...
Yeah, well, I'll be surprised if I make it through this call without getting hung up on. So anyhow, it's, I just want to ask, don't you have a little bit of a problem with, science can tell us what happened hundreds of thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, billions of years ago, but we're having a real problem with what happened 2,000 years ago with this guy, Jesus.
Yeah, I do have a problem with that. And it seems to me that I'm the only one on the side of this that's between me and the theists who's being reasonable. Because if in fact there was a God, then that God could have guaranteed that we had no issue with this, what supposedly happened 2,000 years ago, right?
here's the problem though, is that, even if you present evidence, because the best analogy I've thought of is that it's like atheists or non-believers want to put on rose-colored glasses that there's no such thing as hell and God's not going to punish anybody and this and that. And then they come, it's like I own a lamp store and they come in and say, I want a yellow lamp. Okay, so here you go. Here's those yellow lamp. No, that's orange.
So Brandon,
Okay.
that's really cute, but it's only, you need to show me what those rose-colored glasses are. You don't just get to assert that I'm missing something. You have to present the actual evidence.
Okay,
So if I came into your store, you could say,
either.
Oliver in Brazil, how you doing? You're on with Dr. Daryl Ray.
Hi, Daryl, and Matt, how are you doing today?
Good, Oliver.
Good.
Thanks. So, I told the person who attended me on the call that I was in a transition, being an theist and an atheist. And one of the things that really makes that complicated, I think that conceptually I already consider myself an atheist, but I think that certain emotional bonds, like community and the church, being born and raised, and certain topics which are still hard for me to accept in a way, and this is the particular topic that I'd like to know your opinion about and maybe have some advice, which is how do you, I know at least Matt was a Christian before becoming an atheist. And so I'd like to know how do you cope emotionally with the idea of like you've been expected like a Christian, and especially me, like I was a Mormon for a long time, like since I was born. So you don't have like just the idea of heaven and hell, but you have like all those degrees in heaven, and you probably know all about that, and so it's very hard to imagine that like. Obviously, like intellectually, I don't see anymore any
really
sufficient evidence
but
to agree with that. But it's too hard. I think you get what I'm saying.
Honey in North Carolina, you're on with Dr. Daryl Ray. And Matt, how are you?
Hi, gentlemen. Hi. Hi, Matt. Hi, Dr. Ray. Thank you so much for taking my call. Yeah, it's been a pretty wild ride. On this episode, I've just been listening in, and it's been some colorful conversations. So thank you for taking mine. So today, I kind of want to just talk about, I guess, fear, like the fear aspect when you're kind of deconverting or leaving your religion. I was born Christian specifically in the Church of Christ denomination. About 6 years ago, my dad actually introduced my family to this. I'll just say Christian extremist cult. So I was in that for a little bit. And so now I've kind of moved away from my family, and I've had the opportunity to kind of think a little bit more objectively about my faith. I'm usually naturally kind of analytical, but I've just never put that toward my faith. It was just something you just didn't question. It was kind of the one thing that was exempt from any type of inquiry. So after kind of looking at, different religions, kind of looking at Christianity and what I was involved in, really what I realized is that it just kind of comes down to morality. I know, Matt, you talk a lot about secular humanism. It really just kind of comes down to that. And then a lot of control, just a lot of the things just not being true when you study archaeology, and just history in general. So I have a lot of these conversations with mostly my boyfriend and my friends, because anyone else in my family are just straight theists, like to different degrees, but I believe that there's something. Being an atheist is just out of the question. So he's pretty much taking the plunge. He's like, yeah, I'm a full-on atheist. It's just BS to me, etc. But for me, because it's been such an integral part of my life, really up to the past year, maybe even less. I'm reading these things and I'm coming with these facts, and I'm just drawing the conclusion that it's just not likely. But there's fear there that's just stopping me from kind of making that overall plunge. So I just wanted to kind of see, maybe if you had any advice for me, either Matt or the doctor, it would be very helpful.
Okay, I'm going to pause there because this is obviously also nothing that we're interested in, although it is interesting and we should be interested in it in itself. But it's not what we're focusing on in these sessions. I'm going to stop there because that's the last caller for the show. And I'd like to say, as ever, please make sure that you look after yourself, that you stay safe, that you get vaccinated when you can, that you don't take risks. Look after your parents, and if your parents are still around. Oh God, that sounds quite negative. It's not meant to be. And try to make a positive effect or have a positive influence on someone else's life, because if you're doing that, then that is a really good thing to do, and you can't really expect more of yourself than to do that. And take care until next time, and I will see you. I hope this has been useful for you, and remember this, and take care. Bye bye.